How's it going, everybody? Everybody's here. Thanks for joining. Thanks for checking it out. This is my first live stream, so I'm pretty excited, and I hope you'll forgive any technical hiccups I run into here. I did some tests yesterday. I think I got most of the hiccups ironed out, but we'll see. So what I was planning on doing is taking questions from anybody in the chat, if you have anybody backing Scarlet Twilight that had a chance or wanted to check out the black and white version that I just sent out. That's kind of in progress. I'm super pumped to hear what people think about that. So if you have any thoughts, certainly chime in. Let me know. We should have some guests coming by. I lined up a few people, even though it was sort of short notice. So if they're still able to stop in, we can have some folks in here and talk up some comics. One creator, and then a couple of podcast creators and writers. So a lot of cool stuff to talk about. And even if that doesn't work out, doing some coloring, which hopefully people will find interesting as well. So I think I'm just going to get to it and holler if you have any questions or comments or want to know why I do coloring the way I do. If you've been reading Scarlet Twilight, get any questions. If you backed 3 and you wondered why I'm so late, we can talk about all that. So fire away. Until then, I'm going to be coloring and just walking through some of my process here. As you can see, this is, if you guys have been reading Scarlet Twilight, this is Captain Lancet. I have a few pages here that are a long conversation, so nothing too spoilery, really. And it's also kind of cool because this is the scene I think I was most excited about when I started writing this and had the idea for it. This was kind of the plot twist. I really was like, this is a good reason to do this. This will have some value, and hopefully people like it. So it's really nice for me to finally be here and working on it. Very pumped to get to draw this scene out finally. It has been, I want to say, kind of came up with the idea for this pretty quickly in January of 2021. So it's been a long time coming. Life's thrown a few curveballs my way that made this take a little bit longer than I'd hoped, but here I am finally. So excited to get this one in the can and move on to 3. But this scene is, like I said, kind of my favorite, so I'm excited to be doing it. And so I'm just cleaning up some colors. This is a page where I usually go in my drawing process and do some element of the flats at the outset. So the outlines basically are there, and their shapes I can kind of take and fill up with color without having to outline anything else. And then I need to go through and do the uniforms and things like that later. In some cases, if there's a really big figure or a figure that's really important to the page, like this one is here, this one I actually had done the shading for before. So I had the flats for this done, even though they were in grayscale. And, I wanted to make sure if everything hinges on some lighting issues for a page, I always want to get in there and decide, if that's working or if I need to rethink it. So this one was kind of rendered beforehand, and I'm just going in now and changing colors to what are the correct colors, which is what you're seeing here. So that's what I'm doing here. Triangular shapes. Started this a few minutes ago in the kind of countdown phase of the stream. And hopefully I'll get this in a few. That did not look good. I always find that I have some adjustments to make on these shapes. Do as best I can. I'm a little out of sorts here because when I was doing the stream practice yesterday, I noticed it looked kind of weird for me to be leaning into the camera. So I'm working on the monitor to my left here is not my normal workflow. So a couple times where my hand just kind of zigs when I expect it to zag because my workflow is a little different. But that's just how it is, I guess. So coming along pretty good. Like I said, a lot of this figure was done. The decision making was done beforehand, and then also the other day I did this figure on a different page, which is kind of where which I can bring up now. There we go. So this is to me my favorite page in the series. It's where he really explains who he is, where he came from, what his real story is. After a few, the plot's been such that we kind of been wondering was he really a good guy? Was he a guy who kind of conveniently became good? And this is the page where we all explain it. Obviously, the dialogue's not in there, but this is another one where I just said this is where I'm going to figure out what the color is for this scene, what the color is, the tints, how it affects his costume and stuff like that. So did that, and then I'm taking the sky and this figure and pasting it into my other pages. Well, not this one, but into my other pages. So, obviously it'll be the same color and be consistent. So that's what's going on there. Get started on this figure down here. These ones that are the whole shape, I have to stuff the whole thing there. Actually, it's harder to look at the whole color. So generally, I'll start with the dark shapes first. The darker, when I say dark shape, not dark shape, I mean the darkest point on a certain area. So, so if I have this thing here, this is the red on his costume, but this is the darkest part of the red. This is the darkest part of the yellow. And then I go in and do the lights on top of that. So here. And I keep with smaller panels like this, keep it pretty simple, light source wise, and don't get too crazy on the coloring stage. That and on top of there and make it a shape. So we got that there. Because this red is the main shape as well, I can just throw these back there. So, like I said, this is definitely the issue where I was most excited about getting to when I started the story. Really wanted to make him a character that is very much in a tradition of those Golden Age heroes, and but then introduce some doubt as to whether he was everything he pretended to be. And this scene, without giving too much away, is where we kind of answer those questions. So explaining to his sidekick, after they've learned some things about him, the bad guys have sort of figured out. He's kind of explaining, what he's all about, why he's done everything he's done in his life, and all that. So this was the real pivotal, I guess, is the word I'd choose for it scene. The ear and the face there are obviously the same color, but since I'm probably going to put a little bit of light on his ear to indicate it's a different, shape and space. This is kind of what a flatter would do. The nice thing about working in this program, it's called Expressions, and it's really old, probably half as old as me, I guess, at this point. An illustrator at the first studio I worked for in college got it, and we had a few licenses. When that place went out of business, we bought our software from them because we were going out on our own. So I've still had this software, and it's continued to work in all my computers. And I like it for a few reasons. The first one is probably just inertia. I've gotten really good at it over the years, and I'm really comfortable with how it works. The second, and this is probably the more objective one, I guess, is it's a really good mix of vector and raster effects. I can get all the shading I would normally have to do in Photoshop, but I'd be very locked in. I need to repaint or erase some things. With this, I can say, there probably shouldn't be so harsh a shadow right there, and just pull this down a little bit, and it gets rid of it. So I can really just it's what I think are the best parts of vector and raster artwork. So excited to do that. Oh, we have a guest here. Andy, I hope I didn't keep you waiting too long.
Nah, you didn't at all. Hi, Ben. How you doing?
Good. Thanks for stopping in.
Oh, yeah. I don't have a lot of time today, but I wanted to check out what you guys are doing this evening. Looks like you're doing some wonderful work here
Thanks.
issue 3. And I love the rips in the costume. Boy, that's
he's nice. Had a rough start to issue 3. He heals up pretty good because he's a supernatural creature of sorts. Yes. But he his costume does not have the same advantages as he does.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear you talk about like using what some people would consider older programs just simply because you're good at them. Like how that's the tools that you use. That's the hammer or the screwdriver in your toolbox that you like. And I'm very much the same way. There are tools that come out all the time, but I still use ones that I used 10 years ago because I'm good at them in terms of editing and things like that. So I definitely can feel you on that. Like that's kind of cool that you had to hang on to this stuff. So,
well, this one is I'm really guilty of. So up until I would say 2-3 years ago, I was still using the version of After Effects that was really old, older than you would guess.
Right. No, I probably used the same version, honestly, because I was a big Premiere guy.
Yeah.
When I used to make commercials, I used to be Premiere, and then After Effects was any sort of green screen or anything. I would use that program. So I dig it.
Yeah, but I finally upgraded my Adobe stuff. I finally switched over to PC. I'd say 2 or 3 years ago, about when I moved, and it made my life a lot easier. I'm now on all the current Adobe apps, and my wife would give me a lot of grief about it. It's like, why are you using this old stuff? And I'd be like, well, part of it's I'm lazy. Part of it I have to, I'm in business for myself. I have to pay for it, and part of it is what you're saying. It's like I know where everything is. I would say After Effects and Premiere have gotten much better over the years.
Yes.
Photoshop's gotten a little more difficult to work with, but it's giving you features that are probably worth it, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. And Illustrator's gotten to be really, really tough to work with, despite some of the features they've added. So it's a mixed bag. I mean, there's something to be said for staying with the old stuff if you can.
Right. No, I mean, it's one of those things where they keep on trying to reinvent the wheel, but sometimes the wheel was just fine the way it was. And if productivity is what you're after, if you're good at something, why mess it up? Like, why mess with a winning formula? I totally get that.
So. Yeah. And in fact, this program here, what's cool about it is it lets me draw lines really perfectly if I want to. So I can have a nice smooth curve and I can kind of alternate and get a harsh one there if I want. And the reason we got this probably in 2000 or something like that. And then I was doing a lot of line art and still do a lot of line art, but not as much as we used to because they can render those out pretty good from 3D software now. But if you had like an instructional video or instructional pamphlet for how to install your sink, how to install a propane tank, or how to use a heater, some things like that, I would do them. And I'd sit there and be drawing with my, markers and pens. And I just couldn't get it perfect. Mm-hmm. And my boss at the time was, I think in his mid-60s. And he's the guy that owned the place. He had been an illustrator for his whole career. And I was watching him illustrate a children's book that was for his church, I think. It was a giant plane, and the kid was flying it. So it was like a kid imagining all things he could be in his life. And he was a pilot in this scene. So he's drawing this giant illustration, probably 17 inches wide, like a comic page sat outside of this jet. And he gets his marker out. He draws this perfect smooth line for the outline of the jet. Perfect thick and thin, no jumps, no missteps, nothing. And I watched him do that. I said, Jerry, how do you do that? And he says, well, I'm doing his voice as if anybody knows him, but I probably don't need to do that. He says, well, I worked at it. I would get up at 5 a.m. and he did get crazy early in the morning, but he'd, after he did his routine, he'd sit down for about a half an hour each day and just practice that move over and over, like a martial artist, really. Mm-hmm. And then he described that process, and he's like, and I'm like, how long did he said, well, I started to see some results about 5 years ago. And I thought, yeah, I don't think I have 40 years to get good at this. So another illustrator, who was a guy, he's a really great artist, watercolor artist now, but he was a guy who, through the life of that studio, was not necessarily the most talented guy. And he kind of moved up through the ranks because he was quick to embrace digital stuff when other people were like, not going to do that. And he is the one that brought this software out and got our boss to spring for a few licenses, which then we got from him when we kind of went our separate ways. Mm-hmm. But that was a huge boon to me. And sometimes I do feel bad that I've never been the best doing things physically. I was good at painting, was never the best pen and ink artist, but it's been a huge help to me to have these tools. And sometimes I do miss the idea of doing things physically, and I'll do it every now and then. When I get my reading glasses out, I can still draw, pretty good. But when it comes to just making money as a commercial artist, you don't have that like 10, 15 year learning curve where you can be like mediocre, but still draw like how to transform the Transformers on the back of the toy box stuff.
Yeah.
Which is what some of those guys used to do. They had all this old stuff in their filing cabinets. I'm like, oh, dude, I had this Choose Your Adventure book. This is awesome. And you're like, yeah, thanks. I didn't like what I did there. And also you're making me feel old. Now very familiar with that sensation as well.
Oh boy.
But yeah, so it's cool stuff to see. I like working with it too. It's just the other nice thing is it gives me the chance to do everything myself, which as much as it's so hard to make a comic, and I'm always looking for ways to bring more of my stuff, bring more of it to be me. Like,
yes, I
used to always think like, God, if I could just get good enough that I could have somebody would color this for me. And I like coloring, even though I struggle with it. But it kind of got to the point like, it'd be better if you just learned to do these things faster, look for ways to improve the workflow and all that stuff. So that's kind of what I've been trying to do. Always changing things up and kind of where I am now.
Yeah. What would you mean if it came to somebody else coloring your work? Would you be, it's that whole notion of like collaboration versus like, I mean, right now you have a vision. You even have a vision for what the colors are going to be. If you even turned over colors, then you'd be like, okay, somebody else is bringing their artistic frame of reference to the, the work that I've done. I'm just curious, would you be comfortable with that? Honestly, at the end of the day,
I want to say yes, but and I work in my commercial art stuff I do during the daytime is we have great clients, and sometimes other people in the process, they're not wrong about anything, but they're not as they don't visualize things the way an artist would, or even somebody familiar with the commercial art process and software would. And you always like, oh, I'm gonna have to. I can tell somebody, yeah, that's really not going to work. And I always think of like when I'm getting my hair cut, I kind of like, I want to make the sides real short. Can you do that? And they're like, I could, but it's not going to look how you're thinking. And I always trust them.
Yeah.
Because I'm always working and I'm like, I wish people would say like, don't make me do it to show them why it needs to be the way. And like, just kind of trust me. So I really wouldn't want to be that guy. But I worry that I'd be like, oh, why is that sky that color? I really don't like that. But it's like 3 pages of work. And so I think it would drive me nuts. And I think I'd make peace with it. And the other thing I would love to do is to see someone color my work. So you look at like DC and Marvel stuff now, the line work is all over the place. Different styles. There's no house style. In some ways that's cool. In some ways it's not. But you see a lot big variation of styles and also, sometimes the quality without it being too negative. But it really makes you appreciate what the colorists do now, because the storytelling that goes on with the coloring, the way they unite the images, obviously the color palettes themselves are so great.
Right. Yeah.
It's never been better at any time in comics. So I would kind of like to see. I have kind of a folder on my computer of pages that are. Not necessarily bad panels I don't think are like that good, but they're panels that are like really maybe simple or it's sometimes not that good, but the coloring really sells it. And I'm always like, that, look at that, because that style of coloring really took something that was like here and brought it way up there.
Oh, yes.
So I would love to see what one of those guys did with my stuff so I could, do that.
Right.
Just look at some of my stuff and I'm like, this is cool in some ways, but it doesn't feel like quite like that, and I struggle with that. Well, so I'd love to see it.
I oftentimes on the last comic shop, my co-host Jay Scott often talks about the coloring and how it really can make or break a piece. And sometimes he says, using a muted palette or using watercolors or using any sort of thing like that can often, just change the whole dynamic of the particular book. So, and they often say, what was the best Star Wars film? Empire Strikes Back. Why? Because there were so many conflicting ideas about what that movie should be. And at the end, they came all together and they compromised. And out of that tension, that creative tension, comes greatness sometimes.
It's certainly my favorite by a country mile.
Yes.
But that movie has it's almost like a chase movie, the whole thing, like it's got great energy. And I think that was the time of all the, you read Lucas talking about serials and Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers in particular. That one, and he brought a lot of that in the prequels that in ways I appreciate, but it didn't quite, as a movie, it didn't gel. And I look at Empire Strikes Back, parts of Star Wars, or A New Hope did, but and then by the time it was the Return of the Jedi, it was, and I still love Return of the Jedi, but it became a little more of not a soap opera, but kind of an epic that's ongoing. You were involved with the characters. It wasn't as punchy because it had to tie up all these emotional beats, which of course is the way it ought to be. At the same time, you'd see in Empire, it was just like a serial. I mean, it was like the whole thing would be like some horrible, how are they going to get out of this? Go to another scene, get back to it. It had that punchy energy while still being a satisfying, 2-hour-ish narrative.
Yes.
And then I remember watching, Star Wars was like my gateway drug to all that stuff. And Al Williamson, Flash Gordon art as well, kind of at the same time. When I finally got my hands on some Flash Gordon serials, I'd buy this like video box set and watch it. And it, it's cool. I love them. They're actually a huge part of We Are Scarelt Twilght. But they're not great. All in all, modern
you
days.
have to take them with a grain of salt. You have to understand. I remember seeing Flash Gordon Conquers the Universe when I was in 4th grade. It's actually where my love of Flash Gordon started, because I was a Star Wars guy too. But my dad bought it, and he was like, well, he was born in 1939, so he grew up like in that era where there were still serials that you could see in movie theaters and things. And he said, you should check this out. And I mean, just the cliffhangers, the drama, the suspense, the going to different planets, even though all of the spaceships look like paint tubes, it didn't matter. Like, it was an engaging story. And I could see how like that captured George Lucas's imagination. But I will say this, that like, again, I feel like I love Return of the Jedi, but I think it's starting to go towards Lucas taking a little more creative control over all aspects of the creation of the Star Wars story. I mean, there's talk even, the original Star Wars, which he directed, everybody knows that the reason why the trench battle works so well is because he had his wife at the time edit it. It wasn't even him. Like, she took a lot of B footage from them standing around the little map on Yavin 4, and she edited that in to ratchet up the tension and all this, all these things. And I think that's why Star Wars works. I think that's why Empire Strikes Back works. I think that's to a certain degree why Return works. I think that sometimes the problem with the prequels is you didn't have enough people going, no, like, this isn't the best idea. Maybe this needs a rewrite. Maybe this needs this. Instead, they were all yes people going, yeah, you do
what would you
want.
say to George Lucas? Because if you've watched the special features for The Phantom Menace, I think on the second disc they have the whole, they have like 3 hours of documentaries on the development and the effects and previs and all that stuff. And he's explaining some things to these people. He's like, well, Jar Jar is going to do, and these people, you can just tell they're like, our age, people that grew up with it, and you can just tell they're like, yeah, that doesn't sound good, but. No, it's George Lucas. The worst this could be is like Temple of Doom. That's the worst this could possibly be.
Right.
It's going to be great. I'm wrong. He's right. You could just see it play out in their heads. And I remember seeing the trailer in college. We downloaded it. It was like this 320 by 120 file.
Yes.
Took an hour to download in QuickTime. We watched it. And we're like, that didn't look great. But it's just not a good trailer. It's going to be great. We had no doubts at all. Like, it's going to be cool. We're wrong. He's right. And then the movie came out. Oh, yeah, it this is exactly how it looked. And I'm sure all those people who were sitting there in the Lucasfilm art department, and I appreciate Phantom Menace now more than I used to.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to. I don't think I even like say anything rip on George Lucas. But
the nice thing about Phantom Menace now is that they've expanded some of the universe. I'm a huge fan of the Star Wars Clone Wars series that they put out, and then Bad Batch. So some people have taken those ideas and ran with them and kind of fleshed out that universe so that it seems a little more like, this makes sense. Like this has a flow to it now. And so like in retrospect, but still the dialogue's so stilted sometimes. You're like, oh boy, you had all these actors, you couldn't get just go do that louder. Go do that louder. And I'm just like,
they must have been like, this doesn't seem, but it's cool. I'm going to do it. It's going to be great. It's going to be great. Harrison Ford thought it was dumb too. Look how that worked out.
Exactly.
They're just doing that. And it's weird. If you've read the Star Wars comic, it came out, Dark Horse did it 10 years ago or something like that. And you look at his old scripts and you look at Flash Gordon serials, this is what he wanted to do.
Yeah.
He wanted the speeches and they meeting at the Senate and all that stuff. And like, it's all there. He just was like, that's going to be tough in effects. I'll just do it. What we got with A New Hope it seems like maybe a fallback position to just get something on film. Something filmable. And it turned out that was obviously the greatest way to do it.
Right.
And I mentioned this on your show. I had cut down my comic August. It was initially going to be 12 issues, maybe longer. Then I had to bring it down to 7 when I got it picked up. Then there was like, did we say 7? We meant 4. And kept cutting it down. But I look at it now and I miss some things I lost. But I also think like this was the right roller coaster for that story.
Yeah, you had mentioned that, and I think so too. Reading over August thus far, you've got a good pacing there, and I think honestly, it's the type of series that's going to want to make you read more in the end. Like there's going to be an opportunity to tell those other stories, and sometimes that's what you need from the audience. You need to keep them wanting a little bit more. That they didn't get all the picture, they got some of the picture, and they're like, oh well, what happened there? I wonder if you'll fill in that gap at some other point, because that would be an interesting thing. So I dig that. I dig that a lot. So
no, I hope so. Yeah, it was kind of
any case, I got to get going. I have actually my kids are at there's one of them, and I've got to get going. But hey, I just wanted to stop in real quick, Ben.
Oh, I appreciate it.
You're doing wonderful work here. For those folks listening, Ben will be. That's my son Jacob. He's sometimes on our show as well. Ben will be on our show, The Last Comic Shop, in I think 3 weeks' time. So hope if anybody's interested in hearing more from Ben about his creative process and things, make sure that you subscribe out at www.lastcomicshoppodcast.com.
Put that on screen.
So but thanks so much for letting me talk with you, Ben. It's been really great.
Thank you for showing up. This was kind of short notice and thrown together. But I can't say enough how much I appreciate you stopping in.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And if you do this again, I'll be there as well. So
awesome. Yeah, I hope to make it a semi-regular thing.
All right. Take care and good night, everybody.
Take care, Andy. Thanks. Well, that was awesome. I really appreciate him stopping by. Benjamin Durbin in the chat had a question about the pattern and the color choices, which is a pretty interesting story, actually. In fact, I think I might be able to bring up some of the process I went through there. This was kind of interesting because I wouldn't say I'm a natural costume designer, but it normally comes to me a lot easier than it did this time. And I'm very happy with the result. But I also really had to jump through a lot of hoops to get this one where I wanted it. So I think I have some costume sketches in this expanded version I did of issue 1. And I'll bring it up if I can find it. I could have sworn this was here. Ah, there we go. Make sure that's coming through on screen. So this was kind of a lineup of some of my original ideas, and these ones were not necessarily an evolution, but they were some initial ideas. I was just going through an old pulp book I had, a book that was a collection of pulp comics and covers, and a few sequential pages. Took some things I liked, and then some other ideas I had. My main things were those old pulp comics. So I'd see, there was this collar I saw on a few heroes that this guy had. I kind of liked that. Gave it a try. I wasn't really happy with it. I knew I wanted a cowl. I was initially going to think like a domino mask, like this guy has under a cowl. I knew I wanted these types of gloves that are kind of like the ones the initial, Detective 27 Batman has, where they just look like these weird rolled up gloves. So you can see some ideas going on there. I had some logos I was playing around with. The other thing I did have in my head at the outset was Frank Lloyd Wright is a big influence on me. Love his patterns, love his designs, as a lot of artists do. And I came up with, I was Googling some patterns of his, some of these window sketches he does that are in houses he designs, and they're really cool looking. They beautiful Art Deco look, these kind of complex semi-geometric patterns. And I threw some of those into my design file where all these guys were, and was just kind of had it in my head. And my initial plan was I wanted a bolder costume in terms of shapes, maybe simpler. And you can kind of see I was playing around with here. I was kind of thinking that some of those complicated areas would be very small, like maybe this thing that's on his rib, this red area here that goes down his leg. They'd be just small costume details that if we were zoomed in, we'd see. And I messed around with it, and there was a moment, I wish I still had that in the file, I've been looking for it, where I had that set to be sort of semi-transparent, and I had a mirrored version of it. I accidentally overlapped them, and it gave me, this area of it gave me something that looked like this piping you see here, and also suggested the contours of this kind of sword shape. And that was perfect for a lot of reasons. I don't know how far you are with Scarlet Twilight, but he has a past that involves some element of royalty, I guess I'll say. And it kind of had a crown look to it. And it just kind of came together. There was enough. It wasn't the exact shape by any stretch, but I was like, oh yeah, that could be this could be that. And it was pretty much off to the races from there. So at that point, you see I had kind of this pattern going on, and it was a matter of bringing back in the boldness I wanted. This is actually the costume I used starting in issue 2. He wakes up in the future. They've slightly redesigned his costume for him, and they have this one. And then his other one is pretty close to this, but a little more old school. I think he has the sort of underwear in the outside look that's kind of silly, but really does suggest, hey, this is the 1930s this guy came from. And if he kind of gets that costume ripped up, as you can see here, and I don't want to spoil too much. I don't think it's a big spoiler, but he decides he has to get back in the fight, and his friends have actually saved his old costume. So he gets to go back into the final battle in issue 4 with his old costume, and hopefully dry cleaned after hundreds of years. But that's how it came about. So I was really lucky that worked out for me. Because like I said, I don't think I've ever had one that you hear people talk about that stuff where it's like, oh, there was a coffee stain on my paper and it looked just like this, and I was like, that's the thing. I'm like, that's BS. It never happens. But I would say when I was struggling with this stuff here, that did kind of happen to me, and that's how I kind of got from these guys to this, which I think was a really strong costume. As far as the colors go, you wouldn't really know it from looking at these, but I did always intend to go with something pretty close to this red, this yellow, and green. Part of it is, I think Mr. Incredible's original costume is kind of like that. The big thing for me, though, was a very 1930s comics color scheme. There's an old Flash Gordon page. I don't think it's a Alex Raymond. I think it might be a Mac Raboy, one from the 50s, which I guess deflates my point a little bit here. But it was colored with just those shades, and it looked so perfectly late 30s, early 40s retro. I think Flash Gordon's, there's an explosion going off behind him and he's shooting his ray gun. But it was like, that was my screensaver for the longest time when I first got out of college. And I always had that color scheme in my head. The only regret I have is it looks a little bit close to Dr. Midnight at DC, which has always been one of my favorites. But yeah, that's how it came about. Sorry I was so long-winded about it, but I don't think I've ever gotten a chance to tell that story in great detail, so I'm glad I did. But yeah, that's that. I also want to throw in the chat, if I can find the last comic shop, and throw that into their website in there. There it is. Let's do it. I was on this show, or I'm going to be on the show in a few weeks. We filmed part of it a little while ago, and it was great fun. So I can't wait for everybody to see that discussion. We talk about August Purgatory Underground, which is out in stores, I think, as of this week, I want to say. Issue 1 is out. I'm going to quick comment. Quick link to the last comic shop podcast in there. But yeah, we talked about August. We talked about Scarlet Twilight. Talked about some of my plans for the future of Scarlet Twilight, which I had never gotten to be too far into. So as I get back to coloring, I can maybe go into that a little bit without spoiling issue 4. I don't think it'll keep it in broad strokes, but I didn't really have an idea to do anything else with Scarlet Twilight after I was done with it. But as I got to thinking, some things came to me. One of them was that my nephew, actually I don't want that, wanted me to do a comic book where he could be a character or design a character, but I think really be a character. And I was like, yeah, cool, I'll do something like that one of these days. And I didn't really have a good idea to keep going with Scarlet Twilight. I wrote down an outline at some point that was kind of a little more, much more Flash Gordon-y, which would have been fun. It had some cool scenes in it and some decent story beats, but I thought that it was a little bit too, it was not the same experience. It was too close to the story flow of the initial four-issue run here, but it didn't have the same, sense of tension. The big things in this being, hey, how is Captain Lancet gonna fight these characters he's up against, and also who is he, is what I think is the most interesting part of the story. And I wasn't going to have that part, so I didn't really want to do more with it. I had that outline, I didn't love it, and decided, just because I really want to do more August. After this, I have a story where he's kind of an old man August at that point, and the whole galaxy's gone to seed. It's almost like The Walking Dead, and that's the one I'm pretty fired up to do next. Didn't have too much more fire to do Scarlet Twilight once I was done with it, that if it didn't have the same reason for being, which I thought those questions about him gave it. But I got to thinking, and I got to thinking about this comic that my nephew was adding in mind. And a thing came to me. I was like, well, I could do something that's a little longer, but split up into 3 parts, but also kind of functioned like a Crisis of Infinite Earths or Secret Wars maxi story. Not Maxi the character, which we see right here, but just like a big limited series. Universes fighting universes, armies of heroes and villains, just a big Crisis type of story with Captain Lancet, but done in the style of a 1930s comic, with not necessarily with the art. We'd probably keep it looking like this. But I thought, well, that's cool enough that it would be okay. It would still be Captain Lancet, but it would be over here. But I think that would give it enough reason to exist. Like, okay, I've never seen, we've seen some 30s throwback comics. To me, that wasn't enough to do the initial Scarlet Twilight, just having it be retro. But if I had these questions about who he was and dealt with some issues of like how comics were then, how they were very patriotic, that made it worth doing to me. And I thought, well, this couldn't just be retro. But if it was a retro take on all those big earth-shattering, continuity resetting issues we have now, that might be cool. So I've been writing that out. I have a pretty rough story outline. That should run, I think, roughly 12 issues of 22 pages. I think I might do it as 3 graphic novels down the line. But we'll see. First thing, of course, is to get Scarlet Twilight finished up. My backers have been really patient. We had kind of an interesting summer in that we were going to move from where we currently are, and ended up at the last minute not doing that. But the search for a new place, and then also we were pretty much packed up and ready to go. So just doing all that, packing, and then also just getting our current house ready to sell almost took up the whole summer. So at that point, I lost a lot of time, and said I think my backers have been very generous and patient in giving me too much grief, and understanding that life sometimes throws you a few curveballs. And so my priority is certainly to get this done ASAP. Hopefully be worth the generous patience they've shown it. So that's kind of what I've been doing. Every now and then I'll write down some story notes for future Scarlet Twilight stuff, and then future August stories. But that's pretty much it. I suppose it is. And the nice thing about drawing this way is I can really set it up in a way that makes it easier for me to color down the line. And that's also, obviously it's good anytime you can improve your workflow. I think the other thing, and this is maybe not the best, I should be more disciplined about things, but it is hard to stay in to a certain page that long sometimes. So it's kind of nice whenever you can speed up the process a little bit. It just makes it easier on you to stay in there and be excited about it and be creative about it, not be at that point where you're just like, ugh, I want to get this done and draw the next page. Next page is going to be so cool. So anytime I find a way to get a little easier for myself to do these things, I try and really explore how well that'll work for me. It'll pay dividends in terms of not only just getting it done, I'm doing it all myself, but also just keeping the enthusiasm and energy high. I think the other thing when you get bogged down in the page is not just boredom, which is of course my problem, not anybody else's, but also you get less creative. You don't have that energy. You also start to see things that are like, this is, I was going for really high impact here, but maybe I had to dial it back. And you don't see it at the time, but when you look at things over and over again, your perception becomes a bit skewed. So, I would do that sometimes, think something was too much, dial it back, look at it years later and be like, maybe there were some rough edges to that first version, but it had like pop, which, comics need to have that. They need to be like Jack Kirby, splash panel, hit you in the face. And I think that in most cases, it's generally better to have that and a few rough edges than to like, I don't know, this was a little silly. Maybe I shouldn't have done it that way. I'll always take the first one that has more energy over that. So making sure I find ways to do this necessarily quickly. I don't think I'll ever be that fast, but just in a way that lets me, I think, be making the best decisions is what I like about it, and what I kind of think is like makes it worth doing in that way. So that's how I do it. And the nice thing about this workflow is it's really easy to change if I want to. If I come back to the scene in a week, or maybe I get to the last page and realize something I was doing with the color just like did not work, I can always sort of go back and say, I can always go back page to page with a collection of shapes that have the right colors on them and replace them color by color over the whole page. So, that's also nice too, in that there are times where you're like, oh, this is probably not the right thing, but it's just too much work to change it, or you talk yourself out of it because of that, but really you just think it's too much work. And then this lets me be sure I'm not making decisions like that. Of course, is always good. And that's the thing with doing this stuff on Kickstarter is, I think people really do deserve your best. It costs so much to ship things. You have to charge a little more just to cover your costs because you're not a giant company. And I think the only thing that really makes that worthwhile from a backer perspective, besides just wanting to support in comics, which of course is great, is that, hey, you're getting somebody that doesn't just say good enough, which I really tried to do on this series, and hope I've gotten that across. Hope it's reflected, obviously, in the work. Needs a little more shadow to define that jaw. Unlike self, unfortunately, heroes can't have time double chins. Back to this one. Yeah. Let's see about that. Yeah, I think I like that. And that's a cool thing about this program is I can easily switch through really nice vector shapes and with sharp edges, perfect. They're not edges that look a little weird or wonky, but also stuff that is. Oh, I have somebody here. Oh, Mikey. Oh, shoot. Well, we had somebody, but I don't know if they're still here. Let's see. I'll see if he turns back up. I have to do a better job at keeping an eye on everybody there. My throat's getting a little bit dry, so I'm going to pour myself some more Pepsi Zero. Let me write a quick note to our guest here who was trying to get in. Sorry about that, but we'll see if he can join us back in. Mikey, who's another guest and writer on Last Comic Shop. So let's see about that. Oh, that's good. I don't normally talk this much, so you really do notice your throat getting dry. All right, so that's Captain Lance. That's just about there. I'm going to throw a little bit of the light color for the uniform in. The base color of the uniform. Inside. And that's probably it. Some kind of window there. I don't know what that was. All right. Oh, and I gotta do his as you mentioned earlier, his costume has seen some better days. There we go. That's pretty much. I need some of these. All I need to do is eyes. I keep the eye and the teeth color the same. Normally, of course, those would vary, but I find with comics it's just a little better to keep things a little simpler when you can. Just take on it. But I feel like it's a weird thing. You're not exactly painting because you are competing with the line art, which is generally super modeled as it is, or at least most people expect it to be. And I also find when you really paint over something to a great extent, it just doesn't look like comics anymore. It looks like sort of some other video game-ish type thing. So I'll try and make it so that my colors complement almost just. I almost think of it as tinting the artwork, and not just drawing, kind of modeling it as much. Say that I see a lot of model stuff and modern stuff that is really cool. Has tons of impact. And then I see stuff that, like, if the shading is a little bit too intricate, the color is awesome, they just kind of don't seem to mesh. So I'm always keeping that in mind. And bring over a sky here. I'm going to take the same sky, of course, but I'm going to take the colors. Grab this frame here. See, I'm not doing that, as my gutters can also be the same shape as this other stuff. That's the dark base of my sky. This is the lighter part. We go in and throw some tree shapes or some shading on this particular panel. The thing about this is I normally get a little more involved with my backgrounds, and I don't want to show the actual pages on stream. Although some of the backers have the ones that wanted to read the black and white version have read it. The lettering is pretty spoilerish here. But there's a lot of it. It's a very dialogue heavy scene. So there was a lot of room where I kind of wanted to get it lettered and then see what backgrounds I wanted to go back and add. Because I think one of the things with these old 30s comics I'm really trying to emulate is they'd keep solid colors in there just because they were like, kids need these bold colors. Sometimes that was gaudy, but sometimes it looked really cool. And one way or another, it's always something I want to emulate where I can. Ben Durbin in the chat asked about my background when it comes to comic art, and did I always intend to do comics? The answer is yes, always did. I was just knocked out when I saw Superman the movie as a kid. It would be on I was born a year after it came out. I don't think I ever saw it in a theater, but I saw it on like the ABC Tuesday night movie. And so I have these nostalgic memories of seeing that intro and thinking, is it going to be Superman or Superman 2? Is it? Driving my parents nuts. And every now and then it would be. So I was blown away by that. I was very into comics when I was Mikey. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. Thanks for stopping in.
You're welcome. I'm sorry I got stuck at work, but I got in and it's beautiful, and I will keep watching.
No worries. Thanks for stopping in.
No problem.
Okay.
Thank you.
I was telling a story actually from someone that asked in the chat about how I got into comics, which I think you've heard before.
Yeah.
I was just entranced by Superman the movie. Was kind of into comics from there. I had some issues of Justice League. I had a lot of, whenever there'd be a comic book toy in the like Hardee's or Happy Meal from McDonald's, I would be all over that. I'd be drawing superheroes all the time. In fact, I just found the old Hardee's Marvel stuff that they did in the 80s. I'd been looking for it forever. I finally found a commercial. It was like, yes, that is the thing I had. It was definitely a huge hidden nostalgia. But I was very into that. Always liked drawing. Probably from age 5 to 9, baseball kind of competed for my primary attention. Not that I was ever going to be a great baseball player, but I kind of got to be too small. Everybody else grew up a lot faster than me, and suddenly I was just getting walks all the time. I could never hit the ball because it would just be going over my head. My strike zone was tiny, and didn't hit my growth spurt until high school. So I kind of got back to comics, and the thing that did it was Burton's Batman. I just saw that trailer that put everybody's fears to rest about Michael Keaton and was blown away. back in the comics 100% again. And that summer of '89, if you guys were around for it, probably a little too young, was just Batman everywhere. It was so cool. So that just reignited my love of comics, and I've been hardcore into it ever since. I always wanted to be a graphic artist. I do like doing things for advertisements. I like doing design. I like doing 3D stuff. But I've always done that with an eye on that's supporting my comics work financially, but also, stuff I can use for comics. It's nice to be able to design my own covers, my own logos, I can get reference for things if I need them. I can build things if I need them. If I have a complicated object, I can just build it in 3D and I've got it to look at, which is a blast. I love kit bashing stuff for my spaceships. It is, I think, the adult version of playing with Legos. And I can always kind of tell myself, hey, it's kind of work. I'm not wasting my time here. So that's kind of how I got into it. And I think everything I've done since then, since I was about 10, and it was, when you're that age, you have an eye towards, I think, what you want to do with your life. And it was always comics. So I've done some work here and there. I did some work for a small place called Chimera Publishing in the late 2000s. That never went anywhere. I drew a comic called War God. I'm not sure if it ever came out, but did that for a while. I did a few issues with Dynamite on Warehouse 13 that I was just like not ready to draw. I wasn't nearly fast enough, and the schedule was like, I wouldn't say it was a tough schedule necessarily, but it was tough to work out my time with when I had time to do things with when everyone else on the team had time to do things. So that was definitely a regret of mine. I was just not ready for that opportunity. And but I've always been working on stuff like this. I always wanted to do my own comics, always been pitching stuff to Image. Never gotten a good response, but it's always been something I knew I was going to do. I was just going to keep at it until I got something that gained traction. So that pretty much brings us to now, is just wanted to keep doing stuff, and hopefully it gets better and better until you can't ignore it, I guess is the idea. So that's pretty much the story. Is I was always working on comics. I was mostly just drawing stuff in high school. I didn't really have any story ideas. When I was out of college, I had an idea for kind of a mixture of Dinotopia and King Arthur type stuff. That was not, I think, a fully formed story, but I was and I also didn't really know how to write very well. I could write dialogue really well, but I couldn't structure a story. So that was a struggle. I kind of messed around with that. I messed around with sort of a spy-inspired versions of Venture Brothers that, didn't really go anywhere. I'd done work with, like I mentioned, Chimera. And while those weren't, obviously, I don't think they went anywhere. I did learn a little bit from seeing those scripts, seeing them translated to comics that I draw, and seeing a little bit of what worked and what didn't work. And I was doing some design work for them as well, so I saw a lot of their other comics, and got to see what comics had punch, what ones were not written very well, ones that weren't drawn very well but still worked. I think that seeing that stuff that brought a spectrum of things that I wouldn't necessarily see as a comic reader, did sort of teach me a lot by osmosis. Sometimes you learn a lot by seeing something that's not good, but something about it works, and you notice that thing. And so I got a lot of that. When I was working on Warehouse 13 for Dynamite, they set up a few interviews, and one of them, someone asked me, do you have any ideas of your own? I said, no, I really don't at the time. He said, maybe when I have a few more years under my belt, I'll have something that pops into my head. Almost the week after that, something popped in my head and started drawing it. I had an idea I knew I wanted to do like a buddy comedy, like Lethal Weapon type thing. And that ended up becoming August. It had a long development. And it took a long time to really narrow down what I wanted to do with him and develop him. And then once I even had a good idea, sending out pitches over and over again, different stages of his life, I had some pitches for. Nothing ever stuck until about 2019, restructured into the version that's out in comic shops, I think, as of this Wednesday. and that was that. So that's kind of where I came up with those ideas. And then something about writing that story made it very, very easy to write others, at least as well as I'm able to write them, which maybe some people don't think is so good, but who knows. But I think once I got over that first one, boy, was it easier. I'd get an idea or I'd see something in a documentary and be like, yeah, I know the process now for, making that into a good comic book story that I could draw, or, the type that I do. So it became a lot easier to filter out, I guess, like the raw materials of concepts, things from history, people in history, things from my life, or just impressions about things. I kind of was able to start to take those things and say, put them together into a meal of sorts. Legato Blue asked, well, I did Warehouse 13. Yes, I drew 3 issues of it before the schedule just got too much for me. It's a bit of a mismatch in that it was I had just moved to New York. I was kind of having trouble just getting everything going there. I had a client in my regular job, which I was lucky enough to keep after my move from Ohio. Really, it was in some ways some very good news, but needed a lot more of my time to make it worthwhile. I was almost to the point where I had to devote more time to that or get a whole new job. So that kind of made it very, I still tried to do it, tried to make it all work. By issue 3, I was just like falling apart. The other thing was there was a stretch in the summer where I did have time because all our clients are generally, not everyone goes on vacation, but enough people, the whole thing slows down because you got to have 5 people approve something. One person's gone this week, one person's gone the next week, and everything kind of just gets to be a little slower. So you have like a good way of scheduling some other work. And there were points where that'd be like where we were waiting for approval on issue 1. So I was kind of cooling my heels, waiting for issue 2. But I also, by the time it got there, I was back in the thick of things with work. So certainly it's on me. That's my responsibility to make it work. But it just became unworkable. So yeah, I did it. The work, there's a panel here and there I like, but boy, I did not. I look back at that and as I think a lot of artists do, really cringe. So yeah, that's how it happened. It was still a good learning experience. The scripts were really good. It was a crash course in likenesses. I'm not sure if I ever succeeded at that, but it was very hard to do that. And also working with, you can do likenesses, but you can't, they get a little bit out of shape if someone's making a real extreme expression. So I had a panel where one character was punching someone and saying something cool and being mad. And they're like, well, her expression looks so mad. Can you tone it down? I'm like, well, yeah, but it looks like she's comatose, but also punching someone out. So those are things I guess you run into that made it tough to do. It's also tough to, find a comic book version of a person's face because you can't just trace pictures. You got to figure out, and this is why I'm so much in awe of caricature artists because, man, they get that stuff down. If you look at an old Mad magazine, it's amazing what they're able to do without tracing a photograph or even looking at a photograph necessarily in a lot of cases for reference, but they really do have an idea of the shapes of people's hair, face, all that stuff that combines to make you look at a picture and just be like, yeah, that's that person. Another person who does an amazing job of that is if you guys have ever seen the adaptation of the 1989 Batman movie by Jerry Ordway, there is some of the most amazing likeness work I've ever seen in my life. And I don't think it was, I'm sure there's some panels that were based on photographs, but mostly it looks like he just figured out how to do that. He also is not a guy that has a really cartoony style, so he had to kind of keep it within reality. And to this day, I look at that and think, like, how on earth did that guy do that? It's just some of the most, it's certainly one of my Desert Island comics. If I could only pick 5, that would certainly be one of them. So certainly a learning experience doing Warehouse 13, and one I wish I could have done a lot better at, but life is what it is. So I kind of recovered from that and got to work in August, trying to develop that, and it more or less brought us to today. And Scarlet Twilight here. So
you were mentioning likenesses. Did you? I don't know if you ever heard the story of the movie adaptation for the Dick Tracy film that Kyle Baker
Oh
did.
yeah, Kyle Baker, yeah.
Yeah, he at one point he drew, I guess the original idea was that Dick Tracy was going to have the Dick Tracy nose in it, and they did makeup tests and all that other stuff, and they decided no, he should look like a normal person and all the villains should look grotesque or whatever. So I guess in the long run they only Warren Beatty's people only approved 3 shots of his face. It was a profile, a 3/4, and a full on. So if you look through the book, he's got the same sequence of 3 faces. Sometimes they're flipped around, but it's the same ones over and over and over and over.
I did not know that. I had one issue of that when I was a kid, and it was wild.
Oh, I mean, it's fabulous.
It's a crazy looking book. And I even at the time, not that I was like old enough to think like, how did this get past an editor? But I thought like, how did they get away with this? Because it was crazy looking.
Yeah.
I don't think I still have that. But it was, and I love Kyle Baker's work now. As a kid, I don't think I even knew who he was or any of that stuff. And I think that the story as well, what was cool about it is I think it was 3 issues.
Yeah.
And I think only one of the issues was the movie. I think
the second one, the middle section.
Oh, okay, really? So it goes on beyond that. Cool.
Was it the second one or was it the third? Now I can't remember. I think it's the second one was the movie adaptation, and then the third one was, or vice versa. It might be the first 2 are like a prequel kind of thing, and the third one is the movie. That might be what it is. But
that seems to make more sense because the movie kind of leaves you with a lot of adversaries that are not around anymore. But
that's right.
And I mentioned the Batman summer in '89. The Dick Tracy summer was pretty cool too.
Yeah.
It wasn't as good a movie, but they were really trying to replicate the Batman experience. That logo was everywhere. It was a cool logo. It was an exciting movie. It had really cool toys. And I don't know if where you grew up, if they ran the cartoon in the papers as well, but they did in Cincinnati. So I made like a scrapbook of those. I loved them.
Oh, they did. Yeah, they did. And I had a bunch of the hardcovers of from IDW.
Cool.
So if you think it was bonkers when we were kids, you should see the ones that came out in like 33 and stuff like it was there was a level of brutality in those daily comic strips that was just
There was a quote in one of the Batman books I have where they interview Chester Gould, and he talks about every now and then I just had something so freaking brutal happen just to like piss off moms. And he said, I always knew I'd be losing my edge if somebody didn't freak out at me like once or twice a year.
It's awesome.
And I actually looked at a lot of those because his art is beautiful if you get in there and look at it.
Yeah.
There are some pages that were an auction on here. I always go to heritage auctions, not to buy anything because I don't have that much money to throw around on stuff like that. But they have these beautiful high-res scans. If you sign up, they have a lot of his. His work's amazing. If you really get in there. And I was trying to look at it a lot. I was doing a backup story with the villain from We Are Scarelt Twilght, Madame Satanica, that kind of shows how she got started. And it's kind of a Sunday strip format where it's just one page with kind of a beginning and end that shows her evolution to being just a nasty person to a flat out supervillain. And I was really looking at a lot of that, trying to replicate it, and I couldn't. He's got a gift that I don't quite understand. But that stuff is beautiful. I'm really a big fan of that. And I've been trying to find some of those IDW collections of his stuff, if I can ever find them secondhand. So it's always something every once or twice a year I go online and see if there's anything like that on eBay.
I sold a huge, I don't know how many volumes I had. I had a ton of volumes, and I sold them before I moved, and I regret it. I absolutely regret it. But,
no, I got rid of it. When I moved to New York, I went from having it was like an apartment in a sitcom in Cleveland. It had the view of the city that looked like a backdrop. I had 3 rooms. I had one room just for my comics, just stacked everywhere haphazardly. It was ridiculous. And I had that in a parking space in the garage, and it cost, I think, like $700 altogether a month. It is insane. And I moved to New York, and I had one room with the bed taking up half of it. And obviously, I had to make some cuts. So I don't regret a lot of the comics I got rid of. I probably had too many. I know I got rid of my old New Warriors trade paperback. It must have been by mistake, but I'm missing that one. And then a few of my old Dick Tracy. I had that Dick Tracy by Kyle Baker. So a few comics here and there. I'm like, what was I thinking when I got rid of that one? So there's always few regrets there.
I keep telling myself that I'm not gonna get any more, but I always do.
Yeah.
My wife just turned around and looked at me like.
Well, we have more space now, but I've gotten addicted to just not having as much and kind of liking it that way. Yeah. And I also really like having stuff digitally because I can just zoom in and really see what they're doing. I think I read an interview with Eric Larson years and years ago, answering a question from an aspiring artist, and he said, what advice do you have beyond just like, buy Stanley's How to with Marvel Way or something like that, or take classes? What's your advice? And he said, and he had, I think, a really good piece of advice. He said, get some original art. It doesn't have to be super expensive. It doesn't have to be, the page where Batman jumps off the building. Just get a piece of original art and really get in there. Look at what they're doing. Look at what they fix with whiteout. Look at what type of, and you can usually tell what type of pens they use for the backgrounds, how they outline the figures in the foreground, because you see a lot there. First of all, it being in black and white, and second of all, just being able to get in there and look at it. And I don't have a lot of original art, but the being able to go get scans of stuff online that's high res lets me do that and really see, like, all right, I see how they're adding depth to this in ways that you don't really appreciate, or it's very, very hard to focus on when you see, even high res, the images you see when you get a comic from Comixology, when there's so much color, and it's beautiful color. Even if you're trying to look at the line work, it's hard to, even if it's all there, to focus on it. So looking at that old black and white stuff is always awesome. I'm kind of a digital guy first now, unfortunately. I miss having some of those things in front of me, but I do like having the space in my office as well. So
I have a piece of Sam Glanzman's art from the graphic novel A Sailor Story that he did, and he traded it. I was like a college kid, and I went to Ithacon, like the Ithaca Comic Con, and he was there, and I had some of my little like illustrations on illustration board with me, and he wanted to trade me for one, and he traded me. Yeah, it was cool. He traded me one, like this little tiny like 9x12 painting for like the actual he gave me the inked board original, and then the color, because they used to do the colors on a separate blue line board. They would and then the overlay that would go over that. So like the whole process at the time, I mean, it's all digital now, but back then that's what the whole process was, and it was just such a cool. It was a gift, actually. I mean, he passed away a couple of years ago, but it was something.
Yeah, I'm looking at this. I've actually, and this rarely happens, I have not heard of him.
Sam Glanzman, yeah.
More stuff now. This is awesome. I love the feathering.
Yeah, he did. He did a lot of the war book, like DC war books, like GI Combat, and he did that Sailor Story is a autobiographical. He was a sailor during World War II, and it's about his sequences there.
Yeah, this is awesome stuff. I will have to look up more of his.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Oh, Bob Kanigher wrote it. That's cool. Know that name. Yeah, that's awesome. I love that old stuff. And in fact, I've really gotten a new appreciation for it from doing Scarlet Twilight, especially like some of the variant covers. I always knew Jerry Robinson, he's a Hall of Famer just for more or less bending the Joker and Robin. But I never quite appreciated his line work until I knew I wanted to emulate some of his stuff for the variant cover on Scarlet Twilight 1. And I got some of those high-res scans and looked at it in black and white. Like, these are beautiful drawings. I kind of rated him below Dick Sprang in my sort of early Batman artist hierarchy, but I think he's far superior. And I never never quite got that until I saw the black and white stuff. And he did some, all these, they have the war covers and stuff like that too. The way they drew all those details was amazing. So yeah, really, I always kind of been a fan of that stuff, but I've gotten, the nice thing about doing all this research for Scarlet Twilight is I got a whole new appreciation for how they drew things, even things that as a kid I looked at and didn't really like because they weren't polished in the way that sometimes you need to see when you're younger or you gravitate to. And I look at it now and like, this is amazing work. To think these guys were doing it for peanuts during the Great Depression or something like that is nuts to me. I have no idea.
That's fabulous. And a lot of the comic book guys back then, it was a drudgery for them. They really wanted that syndication money. They wanted to be Alex Raymond, So.
Yeah, I still haven't read that comic. I know Dave Sim is kind of controversial, but I've always wanted to pick up that Alex Raymond book he did secondhand, because that guy just seems to have a really interesting life. And yet, like, it's amazing to think, you read articles about them from the time, they were like celebrities. To just think a cartoonist could be treated that way is insane.
Yeah.
Nowadays, when people are struggling just to get a decent page rate, it's nuts to think that they had the tiger by the tail in that way. And yet the disparity between how Siegel and Schuster were treated, having not quite made that, and guys that made that, what seems to us a pretty small jump, had it made, it's just nuts. Well, I guess you see the same type of difference between guys that had the Image in the early 90s and made it big, and people that I think are just as good that didn't quite make the jump at the right time.
Yeah, that whole early 90s thing where comic artists were kind of rock stars for a little bit there.
Yeah.
And
brief moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was great. And I know people rip on that stuff, and I did a lot of research, not quite to the same extent I did for Scarlet Twilight with the 30s stuff, but I did look at a lot of 90s stuff for August because I knew I wanted it to have that kind of energy to it. So he's such a he's kind of a reflective character. He doesn't talk a lot. He doesn't. He's not somebody that loses his temper almost ever. He's kind of a reserved guy. If he was a Beatle, he'd be George Harrison. So I did know I wanted the art to really pop. I wanted the world and the characters and everybody else to be like, not crazy Image comics from the 90s 100%, but I wanted there to be a lot of that in there to just kind of keep things engaging. So I looked at a lot of that, and I had a whole new appreciation. I always liked Liefeld. Nobody thinks that picture of Captain America is defensible, but his stuff's awesome. And I especially look at like the early Youngblood, those X-Force. I still have those issues where you had to turn them sideways. Those are great comics.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And I look at some of the line work, the detail you get in the faces in Youngblood had so much cool depth to it. And I think the fundamentals were pretty good. It's not like he was the most, you wouldn't see faces from like every angle in the book, but they were cool. And sometimes I look at his stuff now and I like it a lot, but I just wonder if he sits down and is like, oh man, I better put some feet in here, people. I'm never gonna hear the end of it. It's like, maybe if we just didn't give him crap about that, we'd see some really, really cool stuff. You always wonder how much people react to criticism, but I've always loved his work. And I had a new appreciation looking at that stuff from August, much like I did with the 30s guys. But this stuff isn't that cheesy. It's pretty cool. The characters can be cheesy. And I look at Eric Larson, I think his drawing style got a lot simpler. But those early Savage Dragons, man, those were great. Those were like some of the best the first 50 issues of that were like the best. Just ongoing story with good arcs to it that I think I still think hasn't quite been equaled. Great characters, the world was incredible, the costume designs were incredible, and his art could get you could kind of tell what he would do left to his own devices, and when he was putting a lot of sort of Jim Lee Liefeld type cross-hatching and shading, but it still always worked really well. No matter which direction you pushed it, it looked like just awesome stuff. So I'm always looking at that stuff. Love it. kind of miss drawing like that. I kind of find myself, if I have a chance to do something else here and there, like, man, I really want to do some nuts cross hatching on this guy here, just because I haven't done it in so long. Drawing Scarlet Twilight. But hopefully this last issue will go a lot quicker than the current one. Just got done plotting it out. At this point, I have so much I wanted to cover in issue 4. I mean, I always had a pretty good beginning and end for it, but I have known from the beginning exactly how it would end. But I also had some new ideas just a few months ago about how I could do the fight at the end. So I kind of sat down with an Excel sheet, had all the scenes and bits of scenes that would take more than a page to do. Wrote them all down, gave them each the appropriate page count, started trading pages back and forth between them, and that one's pretty much ready to go. So excited to get to that. Definitely excited to get to more, probably more August after that one's done. And then after that, probably back to Scarlet Twilight for its sort of semi-sequel. That was not right.
I missed the beginning. What are you working in? Is it?
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry. This is these are some pages from Scarlet Twilight number 3.
Right.
And this is all one scene. So this issue is pretty much the to me, like, the critical issue of the book. It's the one this scene especially is the one I was very excited to draw when I thought about what this comic was going to be. The big twists happen. What I think are the big twists happen here. And so it's basically a fight and an escape in the first half. And then this conversation takes up, I think, the last 10 pages or so. A little less than 10 pages. It is a conversation. But what I wanted to do was, a couple days ago, I kind of sat down with this page and developed the, this is the key image of the scene, I think. Kind of figured out what color my sky should be, what my lighting color would be, how the lighting affects his costume palette and all that. And then I've been taking that tonight and not these pages. I'll describe those in a second. Taking that and then just carrying it through to the other pages in the scene and mixing it up. So I put some bright red back here just because I think it's kind of 1930s and kind of a comic booky thing to do, and it mixes things up so I don't have this same sky gradient and tree background in every single page. But what's happening here is he's Maxie, his sidekick, has just learned some things about him, and he's kind of telling his story, like how he got to be Captain Lancet and all that stuff. And I think Maxie starts off a little skeptical of some stuff he's learned, and then as he hears the story, which unfolds in this. It's another thing I was kind of excited to do in this flashback style, which is I looked at a lot of Winsor McCay, if you're familiar with Little Nemo.
Yeah, sure.
That was kind of my guiding light there as far as how I wanted to do the line work in this. So we're seeing some monsters he fought back in the Middle Ages and how he used to look, and kind of looked at how Winsor McCay did his shading when he did do it. How he spotted his blacks. I kind of go a little heavier on the blacks. What parts of the face he would draw and not draw. And so this page it's just flat colors here in my coloring drawing program. But I think I have some pages where I have a Photoshop action set up where you see sort of bring up that page where you can kind of add like a different sort of distorted printing look to it. Let's see if I can bring that up.
I was wondering what program you were into. Is that just Photoshop or?
Oh no, this is called Expressions. It's very old. This doesn't look like it has it's got the texture on it. I think I changed it a little bit since then, but basically I'm adding a bunch of texture, dropping the blacks out a little bit, and then adding a bunch of dust and scratches. Let me see if there's another one. I think this is more what it looks like in final. So I use Photoshop to take it from what you saw in my drawing program to this version. So the flashbacks all look like this. And then when they're in the foreground, they look normal. This program I'm working in is called Expression. and it's, I think, about 20 years old, maybe more than that. We had some licenses left over at my old employer when this is in the early 2000s, and bought our equipment and some software from them when they closed down, and we started up our businesses back then. So I still have it. It's still continued to work on all my computers. And I part of it's just ease of use. After having used it for so long, I'm good at it. And part of it's just this program does a lot of things really well. The drawing tools are great as far as getting me really nice shapes. I can go with a B-spline here, so I can kind of define a curve like that and get it to look perfectly smooth. If I hit Option, I can mix it up and get a sharp point if I want it. That's been really helpful me over the years in not just drawing comics, but doing line art stuff, and just for my regular job. So it's made it really easy to do, and it's just been a great program. I can do stuff like this. I can, when I'm doing page I was showing you, it lets me sort of define. If I want a shape to have a softer edge, I can, adjust that, make it bigger or smaller, so I have more fall off. So I get a really good combination of vector and raster effects. I don't think I have any on this page, but I do on another one. Let me open up the last page of the issue. There it is. No, that's not it. There it is. It has a lot of good things where I did the water with one of the same tools I was showing you just there, where you adjust the I guess orbit of the fall off there. But I can pick all these different types of textures, or even make my own. I have a few in there I've made, and it lets you just, this works for water so well, especially if you're doing it kind of simple. So I had I drew all the blacks in there to reflect the boat, and used this effect, and then kind of went in and just drew some more blacks to match my ripples I was getting from just my colors. It's a great tool. I think for comics, it's certainly a different approach than Photoshop, but it gives you so much flexibility. I just love having it. So as long as it keeps working on my computers, I will keep using it. Oh, and Benjamin Durbin, thanks about the nods to the suit. Yeah, that's definitely something I wanted to do early on. Is when you see him back in the day, he's got his logo. It'd be a real easy thing to attach to his current state. And I think it also, I think I have to say this without getting too spoilery. I think there's an element of things you think he would not be proud of that he is. And I think that him carrying through that logo on his superhero outfit that he dons in the 1930s shows that he is, I guess, a lot more, it's hard to describe without getting really into it. He's very much at peace with who he is and proud of who he is. So I think that's a good way to show that. And in fact, this is kind of a subtle thing, but when they change his costume in the future and give it to him, it's cool. It looks kind of the same, but it's almost like in Indiana Jones where somebody loses their hat. They're in big trouble. It's like this weird little visual cue. Things don't go too well for him when he's got the updated new suit. And once he gets back to basics, things start to go his way again. So not that causes it in any way, but it's just kind of a nice thing that I don't know that you'd ever see and think of, but I hope just reinforces, kind of who he is. So yeah, it was fun to have a thing work out that I could do it for story reasons as well. But yeah, that's pretty much it. So I got a little bit of work done. I have to dial off pretty soon here. But Mikey, I really appreciate you stopping by. Mikey is another comics creator. He's on Last Comic Shop as well. Mikey, is there any links you'd like me to share or things?
Oh, no, I mean, I love your work. It's got this classic. It's what you're going for. Like you're going for that classic mixed with the modern kind of thing, and it works. It's doing exactly what you want it to do, and it's just beautiful to look at. And it was cool to see the process.
Awesome.
That's awesome.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome, man.
And everybody who stopped in, left comments, checked it out. I really appreciate it. So hopefully this is just the first of many. I'd like to do this in a semi-regular basis, do my colors, layouts, drawing, everything, and have people on the chat. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Mikey, thanks again.
You're welcome.
And everyone in the chat, thank you again. And I will see you next time.
All right. Good night. Thanks.
Thanks again, everybody.
Sure.
Come in, Captain August. If you've managed to infiltrate that rebel fortress on the Martian surface, you must destroy it, or Earth is doomed!
The whole system's locked down. Nothing works. Wait, the targeting system's accessible. If we can't stop it, at least we can change the target. From our forces here to their rebel bases firing on us from the surface.
Great idea, kid! Switch that around and let's hightail it out of here!
Locking in new target. Now!
While most citizens are relieved, Baron Segan is gone, and the rebellion has ended. Many feel Captain August is a war criminal who should answer for the destruction of Mars.
He can't have survived.
Once they take what they need, they're gonna wipe us out.
I've looked a galaxy lately for Mars. But we both know why it really happened.